and welcome back. I'm very, very excited because our next guest is not only a friend, but now a decorated award winner, Priyadarshini G. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and this is a wonderful space with RYM News, and I'm excited to, talk about everything that we're going to discuss today, but thank you for having me.
We've actually talked to you quite a few times already, either at different events or just talking to you in general. So the fact that it seems like every time I talk to you, you always have new news and it's always better. So it's so great.
I get that a lot. Everyone's like, oh, there's something always happening in your life. And I promise it's not on purpose. I feel like, there's never an overnight success story. So if you're continuously working and just on the grind, like focused on yourself, bettering yourself with every different project that you take on, things just fall into place. So it's been a blessing.
Just in the past few months alone, I've seen you traveling to other countries, and then I saw you tied up at the Oscars, and then I saw you recently, as you guys saw earlier in the show, we talked about the first ever Holi event in Los Angeles,
yes,
as we were discussing Holi, internationally. And now, you've been winning nonstop with this project of yours, Colonized the Largest Genocide. And you already know this, but for our audience at home, I have actually watched this, I think, 6 times.
Wow. Thank you.
It's because, I love the documentary, and I love the style of your documentary. I love it so much because it really resonates to my personal level, because it reminds me a lot of what I do every day here at RYM News. So it's a very journalistic documentary, and it's very much like what you would expect to see on like a 2020 or like any kind of news show. And in watching it, it was very eye-opening to just see how much of it, because when people think genocide and things like that, especially in the United States, you think of the Native American population. Internationally, then you go towards like World War II. So those are usually the ones that tend to get a lot of attention, right? But then you go to other countries, like, either in Latin America or like with you, it was in India, correct?
Correct.
And that's just like, whoa.
Yeah, I think the concept was always something very close to my heart, because my log line has always been that I was born in a country that was colonized, and I was raised in a country that was also colonized. So the fact that colonization is not a one-dimensional subject needs to be talked about and implemented into school textbooks, so that children are aware of what's going on and not just being brainwashed or fed with the mainstream popular news or media and just pop culture. So for me, I wanted to make a docuseries trailer that I eventually want to pitch to streaming sites. My next step is to pitch this for large streaming platforms to actually fund this, to make this from scratch, because this was a found footage film that I had made during film school of my MFA in digital cinema, which happened during the pandemic. So everything was completely shut down. As you know, I live in Los Angeles. We were not allowed to film anything. You need permits to even move an inch or shoot a picture here.
And they're thousands of dollars.
And they're thousands of dollars. And I had classmates that, lived in more remote areas, and they were able to film. And I was like, how do I do this? How do I graduate? And it forced me to be more creative. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be working on this project for 18 months. I need to really love the topic. If it's something that I'm half-assing, or if it's something that I'm kind of interested in, it's not going to work, because I need to have that passion fuel this project. And so when I really dug down deep, I was like, all right, what can I work with? It forced me to be more creative when it comes to storytelling, proof of concept. How am I going to edit this? I did my own voiceovers, wrote my own script, and pulled pieces from, like you said, very like a journalistic research aspect of picking found footage or archival footage, which also costs an arm and a leg. But thankfully, because this was a student project, I was able to get leeway with it and use it for education purposes only. And I was able to find a lot of similarities. So obviously not just speaking about the United States, where I've been raised my whole life, and India, where I was born. My two identities were a part of this project, but I was like, no, there has to be some more commonalities, because this is a global subject. And the more I started digging, I found archival footage from Senegalese troops based in France marching for Bastille Day. And that's when it really hit me. I'm like, colonization is a global topic. It has affected nearly every single country in the whole entire world, but we don't ever connect the dots, and we don't see how it's playing out today. So in 2020, 2021, when I was making this film, my advisors, who I'm very thankful and grateful for, told me, don't start with history because you might bore people.
Yeah.
You need to talk about why it matters today. And I said, well, okay, what is China doing with all of its infrastructural projects around the world? I talk about what's happening with all the money they've lent, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, African countries, Latin American countries, like you're saying, and then you now see smack dab into what Russia is doing in Ukraine. That's colonization.
Absolutely.
What even, I'm proud to be an American, but what the U.S. has done in the Middle East, that's colonization.
It is. That it is.
And we don't see it because it's not laced with what we are used to, like learning what colonization, which is the shackles and chains, but now that's converted into a monetary, relationship. These countries hold a control over these developing nations because they depleted them of their natural resources. So I wanted to connect the dots and be like, why is this not called genocide, first of all? And then I did more research and I found out the UN's definition of genocide doesn't cover war crimes, politicide, cultural or religious differences where mass people are murdered. They don't count that as genocide.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why you have this debate of why were there actually no numbers. So during World War II, a lot of the letters that were written in code from the colonized nations towards their families had different kind of explanations of what they were facing. And a lot of them that had any derogatory marks, they faced the repercussions in person and those letters were burned. So there is no tally of how many people were killed. And a thing that really, really pushed me is I saw Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, who he's intelligent and he's a brilliant director. But at the same time, when you realize the actual fact that the Battle of Dunkirk was mostly fought by the Muslim League of, at that time, British India, which included Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India right now. But in the film, you only see one Punjabi Sikh character.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm actually really happy you bring this up. I have never seen this film.
Okay.
So now it's going to make me have to watch this film because I'm going to have to catch that. And it's interesting that you bring up the fact that with genocide, that it doesn't cover so many aspects of it, because with that being said, there's a lot more that does happen in that term or in that genre of things that we don't realize, that we don't see, whether it can be culturally, ethically, financially. But because when people think genocide, they oftentimes think of death and violence. They don't see it that way.
Right.
And I mean, you can even look at a lot of the cultural things that have happened with just recent award shows where they will look at they'll appropriate and they'll say, oh, we're including you, but not really.
I would say that there is an increased amount of representation of Indians and other South Asians in mainstream Hollywood, but representation does not equate to inclusion.
Exactly.
So inclusion, I think any of the brown colored folk, we can all ally in that we are not just a quota to be checked off by a production company. We are not just, all right, we got that one brown person who's either an IT scientist or a terrorist.
Or in my aspect, or the janitor or the cartel boss.
Right, and they don't necessarily need to have an accent. And that's something as an actor, from the other creative hats that I wear, I've faced is, okay, would you want to do this role as the exotic Indian chick that has literally 2 words in a 10-page script? Or you want to do this where you're the stereotypical person with an accent and you're a geek and all these things. Like I even got an audition one time for this big company. I'm not going to name them, but I remember reading the script and it was, the context of it was preparing for the citizenship test. And the dialogue had said of the girl who was applying to be a citizen and practicing with her grandmother, and the grandmother asks her, why do you want to be a citizen? And the dialogue had mentioned to have a passport. So I was in such shock and awe that a person who comes from an immigrant background knows that the legal system of having a permanent resident and then turning into citizenship in the United States requires you to have a passport, even if it is international.
Yes, it does.
You have a passport. Mm-hmm. It's just not the U.S. one. So all of these inherent biases are always depicted in the writing because they're not writing from experiences, they're writing from observations. And that's the biggest problem that we have in Hollywood. Yes, The Darkest Hour won the best Oscar, and it was about how Winston Churchill had saved us, and the Allies won in World War II. And while that is all dandy, they do not ever mention or, just glorifying this person who was a murderer, and he killed 5 million Bengalis for the Bengal famine. Why? Because he wanted the trade routes and the food ships to be diverted, and so for the Japanese to not invade into the Indian soil and to proceed, he took away all their resources and took that ship and sent it to Europe instead of where it was actually needed. So you killed 5 million people in a span of just a few months versus everybody in World War II that we are accounted for. And although it is very atrocious and it's not to say that comparing the sadness, but just equating numbers on the topic of genocide itself. And that was over how many amount of years?
Oh, I think it was around 9 years. And then when you think about it, what's so interesting about that is people often, whenever they think of the genocide that happened in World War II, they focus mainly on the Jews. However, there were a lot more other cultures that were impacted too and that were sent to those concentration camps,
yes,
including Jehovah's Witnesses and Gypsies.
Yep.
And it's so crazy to think about because oftentimes you only look at the biggest number and
right.
you don't look at all of the other numbers.
You don't look at the other.
Exactly.
Right.
And we should focus on the other more.
As well. And I feel like we are not taking away from the atrocities that has happened to a specific sect or the main focus, right? And you never atone for it. And you're hailing a film which glorifies somebody that did so many different war crimes to not just India, but to their other colonies just to win this war. And what do we get in return? A monument with their names on it.
Yeah. And a lot of your stuff stolen.
Yes, just speaking about that, that's also a chapter in my film where I talk about after World War II, basically, all of these colonies got their census together because Britain was basically on the brink of bankruptcy, right? All of these colonies were funding their economies, and now they all wanted independence. So slowly, steadily, you see a timeline in my film of all the countries post-1945 that wanted to gain independence. India, specifically in 1947, they did the divide and rule concept. India, Pakistan, and then later on in 71, Bangladesh was foreign. But on top of that, you broke up not just the land, you broke up the people. Mm-hmm. And then you took away, just in India alone, about $45 trillion of just assets and saying, oh, we built you railroads, you should be happy. We gave you education, we taught you this. People have no idea that the Indian subcontinent, let alone, was the precipice of society with Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and all the Mesopotamian. It was a cradle of civilization, and we gave so much back to this world. And I can say the same thing in North America with the Mayans, Incans, Aztecs, and all the ancient cultures that have contributed to world history. And when we have these architectural accomplishments of pyramids that have come up, aqueducts, we had indoor plumbing before most of the Western countries learned how to shower. So the fact that there are shows on major channels equating brown people's accomplishments to aliens is not only disrespectful, it's insulting.
It's very insulting to all of our intelligence. Absolutely. And, in talking about that actually, it's going to take me to a show that I watched a while back. I don't know if you may have heard of this. It was a show that was on BBC years ago, but unfortunately they're no longer in production. It was called Citizen Khan, right? It was about a Pakistani family in England.
Okay.
It was or not England, specifically around London, mm-hmm. right? And in watching this show, it was a show that I had never seen before. I randomly found it on YouTube through my husband one day. And when we were watching it, they brought up an episode where they went to one of the museums over there. And all you could hear is from the daughter and the grandmother. They just wanted to get their stuff back because it turned out that some of the stuff that was stolen was directly owned by the grandmother's family.
Yeah.
And they're putting it up here like it's such a wonderful trophy, when in reality, it's all stolen.
It's all stolen. And if you've heard recently, the big debate in England right now is because they still have the Kohinoor. Mm-hmm. And we want it back.
Yes, after Queen Elizabeth's passing. And that was the first thing I heard was, are you going to return it back?
Absolutely, because she was the OG colonizer. Mm-hmm. She was the remaining descendant and actual active participant and saw all of these nations. You see the Commonwealth Games. And I find it always ironic how sports can unite us, but at the same token, you see the Commonwealth Games with the once upon a time queen sitting over all of her previous dimensions and just thinking about, oh, I used to own all these places and what are we doing playing a game in their country? Right, so I have certain feelings about that. But at the end of the day, those are decisions that are not made by me. All I can do as a storyteller is convey the information that I have contrived and retrieved, and ask questions. And I think I'm not passing a judgment. I can have my own personal opinions based on, being raised here. In the 4th grade, the biggest project I remember was the mission project. And what was the purpose of that? Was for all of us for our parents to go and find, we were all assigned a specific mission, go to Michael's or any other craft store and find that specific mission kit, rebuild it, paint it, make it look pretty, and tell us of the history about the mission. But we never learned the atrocities that happened inside those walls. We learned about that much later. Who was buried in those grounds? Why were they buried? Why were they taken away from their families? Why is that the biggest project that we must learn in the 4th grade? Why don't we learn about how they were converted or taken against their will, or made to forget their languages, cut their hair? Anything that reminded them of their culture was stripped away from them. Now I know, or I've heard recently, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they no longer have that in the 4th grade curriculum or as a mandatory project for these reasons.
See, I feel like on one end I can understand why, but at the other side it's kind of like they should have kept it and gone deeper with it.
Yes.
Shown more. Instead of, why take it away? Why don't you give us much more of an impact? I will say this, growing up in Texas, we actually do go very in depth in some of our middle school years and in our elementary school years directly with Texas history. And as you saw, Texas did become its own nation for a while.
Right.
And we saw a lot of different aspects of it. And me growing up in San Antonio, I know a lot about the whole Alamo thing. And in learning about that, if it wasn't for the fact that it was directly related to Texas history, I guarantee you 99% of that no one would even know. Nobody would.
Right.
And, it's funny because so that was when I was in 7th grade, right? Now, 6 years later, I'm a tour guide at the Alamo.
Oh, wow.
Learning every single aspect in and out of all of it.
That was never in the school textbooks.
That was never there. And I had to learn it just because it was my job. But then the more I learned about it, it was like I ended up becoming a historian about it.
Right.
Because all of a sudden it's like you're learning so much about this one building that had so many impacts and so many different levels of life and so many different generations. People think that it's just remember the Alamo, but there's so much more than that. And it's something that whenever I hear about these things, about things being taken away in the curriculum, it drives me crazy because it's like, no, put it back. Put it back. Give us more. Give anything.
Give it the full scope.
And kids want extra credit half the time anyway.
Right.
Tell them to look into it more.
Yeah.
See what else they can find. Don't just give them the minimum.
It should be a reflection of the good and bad. Like, this was the best case scenario that they aimed to do. Or maybe this is what was the aim to maybe create a literacy rate. I'm not saying that is the best thing that had happened, but it should show the full scope. These were the atrocities that happened, and this is how some of these people misused what was the main purpose, or to have infrastructure, or all those things that they say, well, we gave you this. It shouldn't just be a takeaway. You should be grateful for it. These people had thriving civilizations before colonizers, and I just don't want to focus on just the British, and I want to make it clear that I'm not against the people. It's more about the bureaucracies that try to cover it up and make excuses for it, whether that is the French, whether that is Germany, whether that is Belgium, whether that is Spain, whether that is Portugal, the Netherlands. Like, it goes on and on and on. United States. And it feels like we need to hold ourselves accountable, and we owe that to our next generation. And even till date, if I want to see an artifact about Egyptian heritage and culture, why do I need to go to England? Why can't I go to Egypt, give that money back towards tourism and propel their economy and learn more about their culture by assimilating into it, absorbing it, and realizing, wow, this is what this country had to offer and this is its history. Why do I have to go to their colonized country to pay them tax dollars to see King Tut?
Yeah, it shouldn't have to be like that.
Yeah, and
King Tut goes on tour.
Exactly. So even in his passing, he's giving back to a country that was never his. So when you also see scenes like that in the first Black Panther film, where you see Michael B. Jordan going into the British Museum and asking, oh, is that what your ancestors did, or did they buy it, or did they just take it? And that strikes a chord. And I got a lot of pushback from advisors, people within school. They were like, you're going to ruffle a lot of feathers, so just be ready. Because I'm fighting against generational people who were taught one thing, are very adamant about it. And I think that's the positive thing about our generation, is we're trying to unlearn and relearn. And the part of that is realizing that we don't have all the answers, but we can continue to seek questions and answers from each other and continue to like push the narrative and to give back to our next generation by telling them, keep asking. The minute you be like, stop asking questions, this is what it is, that's where it becomes dangerous.
Absolutely. And you know, that's what I hope to see with this project of yours. And I hope that it does come to fruition. You do get to create a series of it, because then it's going to become an opening for all of us who do want to learn more.
Right.
And I love seeing you as a storyteller. And actually, I want to dive more into the storyteller side of you.
Okay.
So you've been doing radio and TV hosting and stuff for a while now. You're with Dash Radio and Ruckus Avenue Radio, correct?
Correct. So it is with Ruckus Avenue Radio, and they partner with the Dash Radio app, so we shoot at Dash Radio, correct.
Nice. And I've actually, the first time we met was, we were both covering the same event. It was crazy. Oh my God, I've just got to get out of there alive.
It was a great experience to meet you and to cover the event. It was a fun event, but there's always something, you know, especially post a pandemic, it's a different world. People have changed.
Absolutely. People were so tense just to be around each other again.
Right. And they were also like static, like what to do, what, you know, they feel like social norms have totally changed since
Absolutely. You know, but with that, I loved watching the way you work, especially because I've seen you from behind the camera. I've seen you from in front of the camera. You have this producer side of you, but you also have this on-air talent side of you, which is something to be admired, because oftentimes, and it's funny, I talk about this a lot with a lot of my own peers, people think that to do the job that you do, it is as simple as just coming in, sitting here, getting in front of a camera and looking pretty.
Absolutely not.
And you actually went further into it with just this project alone, yet you do this every day.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot. It's very, energy draining, and you need to know what you're talking about. It's not enough anymore for young girls to just go on social media and think, I can look pretty and stand in front of a camera and people will listen to me. That is no longer a thing, nor will it ever be. You have someone's attention, but how you keep it is with your thoughts and your words and your actions. So everybody wants a mic, but they don't know what to do once they get it. So it's always a lot of hard inner work, and that comes through just living life and having those hard experiences kind of mold you, and going through tumultuous paths, making hard decisions, sacrifices to be able to uphold something. Because, you know, as a host for Ruckus Avenue Radio and their correspondent, when I go to these live events, I have a responsibility. I'm not representing just myself as a host. I'm representing a station. I'm representing 9 million listeners that we have. And it's my responsibility to go there, be respectful, ask the appropriate questions, and yes, also be very positive and pleasant, because no one wants somebody with a nasty attitude. There's always going to be something at any type of event or in life, especially in the entertainment industry. It is not honky-dory. You can attest that. There will always, whether it's one event or another, there is always going to be some sideball curve that you're going to have to adjust with a smile.
And you have to do it within seconds.
Within seconds. So there needs to be, I think it's that survival instinct, where you need to get a story, but some calamity happens or something, and how do you still work your way? And I think being respectful, being intelligent, and knowing how to be persistent but also patient at the same time really does pay off. So it's very left and right brain, like you mentioned. Like, yes, I do have that producer side of me, very left brained and kind of very logical, and okay, I have these things that need to be done. What do I need to do task-wise, and what is my end goal? Very type A. But then the creative aspect of me, coming from my acting background and just in the performing arts in general, makes me understand where the guest is coming from and what perspective they're bringing to the table, because they're coming from a creative aspect, and you're asking positioning questions of how to place their product, so to speak, or what they're talking about, or their film, or, you know, it's understanding that I was also asked questions once, like I am today, you know, and I think it also comes from my pageant experience, from being former Miss India Southern California, Miss India USA, where the question and answer round is the deciding factor. It's not the bikini round. It's not how well you can walk in a ballroom gown. It's your talent and how you present yourself, and if you're able to speak with diligence and speak with humbleness, but also speak with purpose.
You know, I feel like that really resonates a lot to where so many of the pageant queens end up in after they win the crown. Because you'll win the crown and that's great, but then what are you going to do when the year's over?
I know.
And oftentimes they end up in entertainment. Some of them end up in media. Some of them end up in, some of them even end up in production.
Yeah.
To where, because it's really just interesting how that works out. And, you know, in watching you and seeing a lot of your work and listening to a lot of your interviews and stuff, because I've been, you know, obviously, you know, I'm a fan.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
You know that.
That's so sweet.
And I love your work, and I really do love what you're doing. But I think what really catches my attention is that you take every single story as it is in that day, in that moment. That's all you're focusing on. Wow. And not only that, but then I've also seen it where, calamity strikes. So what are you going to do?
Right.
I've seen you make those decisions firsthand. To where, how are we going to do it? Because we still have a story to do.
Yeah.
And it's not, we go home, we're done, it's over. No, it's you still need to make this work.
It's that survivor spirit. I'm telling you, there's been a lot of different situations I faced in my personal life with family, just growing up, and there was a lot of, you know, life-threatening situations where in that moment, you're no longer a child. You need to understand, this is the point I call 911. This is the point where someone else needs my help. I need to step it up. It doesn't matter what my age is, what my gender is, what all of my other privileges or, you know, kind of not crippling, but whatever you think is a handicap, right? For me, people be like, oh, well, you're a woman of color, you're this, and those are your negative things. For me, those are my power suites. It's because of this, and I'm able to go and ask for interviews. I can go up to an SS Rajamouli from Triple R Bahubali, you know, going up to an Oscars, and just ask him respectfully, hey, I've reached out to your people, I haven't heard back, can I get an interview? And he'll say yes. He did say yes. And so,
you know, I watched you do that coverage for that.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And, you know, I think with talking about RRR and everything, it was interesting to see all the coverage that we saw with that film, because, like, 80% of it, people kept calling it Bollywood.
Oh my gosh. And we had that question. I asked him about that too.
Oh my God. And you know, luckily, not everyone is like me in that I married into a lot of this stuff. Right. You know, so not everybody knows, right? And which is understandable. You know, if you're, I'm not saying naive, but I would say, you know, you just don't have the facts on these subjects. I can understand that. However, if you're interviewing the nominee, and you don't know, you should know.
I mean, we just had Priyanka Chopra Jonas's interview podcast come out where she misnamed it as a Tamil film, and that's absolutely incorrect. It's not a Tamil film, it's a Telugu film. And so it goes back even more to having the white man's acceptance. It goes back to us holding ourselves accountable and knowing our own history. So whether that's with my film or whether that's with any person I do interview, it's research is the utmost importance, because the last thing you want to do is offend someone by wasting their time, essentially. Because then they'd be like, this person didn't do their homework, and why should I give them my time of day? So when I did interview SS Rajamouli, and I went in as much as I could, because I don't come from the Telugu film industry. I grew up predominantly watching Hindi films, American films, sometimes Bengali films, the classics, but I was not so attuned to Telugu films until I found Bahubali 1, Bahubali 2, and then Triple R. And so I asked him, how do you feel of this term of Tollywood? Because I asked him that the Bengali film industry is also called Tollywood, and so is the Telugu film. So it's a misnomer, and it's also a copycat of the word Hollywood. How do you feel about it? And he said he hated it. He said, we are the Telugu film industry, and that's where we are. And I asked him like a larger question, do you think it's more prudent, because India has so many different languages and dialects and sub-production companies and movie entertainment industries, not just the Hindi language films, but all over. And what if we just called it the Indian film industry? And within that, we have all these different languages. And he liked that. But at the end of the day, it comes back to holding ourselves accountable. So if we have our representatives in the mainstream media misnaming the language of the film, it creates a bad precedent. So I feel like we got to do better and learn before we start like speaking. And it goes back to what we do as hosts. If you're going for anybody, there are a lot of the times, a lot of people I interview, it's the first time I'm meeting them. And although I have researched about them, I need to know their background. I need to know what makes them tick and what is their driving force. So when we go to film school, we learn that each character has an objective. And there's always an internal conflict and an external conflict. So say someone is here trying to promote their product, whether that is a film, medicine, music, whatever it may be. That's a product, right? That's the external thing they're doing. But the internal thing that drives them could be some backstory about how they were raised and they went without for a certain thing, or they always wanted to be a storyteller, or they always wanted to do something that they weren't able to do, but now they're doing it. So that's the story within the story that I look for.
That's amazing. And you sound a lot like me.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's one of those things that it comes with the territory of this job. People think that, you're only working for maybe 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. They don't, especially take, for example, whenever we have to go to like a red carpet, for example, they will give us a full list
of people.
Most of the time.
If you're lucky, if you're
lucky and you get the list, you will have a list of people. Yeah. Oftentimes you won't. Right. And if you don't, oh my God, good luck. Because those are crazy. But then you get that list a couple of days prior. Maybe. And now you have to take all of this extra time, not even thinking about production. See, half the time, I'll be honest with you, I don't care about what I have to wear half the time. I don't focus about my makeup half the time. Not until the day of, or maybe like 2 days prior, I'll start to think about it. And then unless it's like I'm making something, because I make a lot of my own stuff.
Yes.
So like if I'm doing that, okay, that's fine. But if I'm not, I don't think about it till that morning. And then I'm like, all right, how am I going to do to make this work? Because the entire time I've been so focused on who I am going to be sitting down with, who I'm going to be talking to, who, things like that. Like one that we did last year that I was so nervous about. I was so nervous. It was when we interviewed with Ali Zafar. And, actually a really good friend of both of ours, Samir Musani, took care of that. Thank you. And
he's great.
He's amazing, and I hope I don't get on his nerves too much.
He's so sweet. He's so sweet.
Oh, absolutely. But I remember 2-3 days prior, I was so nervous, and I started watching some of his movies. I started listening to a lot more of his music. I knew him more from his musical background,
right?
Where I didn't even know that he had an artist background. I didn't know
he's
about
an actor.
his TV. No, like even just his art background, like him just creating his own artworks. Like I had no idea.
Right.
And you're learning all of these things, and you're seeing all of these things, and you're just like, oh my God, what is happening? And now it's like, you have to still prepare a list of questions.
Right.
And then you get there and you're thinking you might get 30 minutes and you only have 10.
Right.
So then it's all right, now I got to cut all this out.
Adjust, pivot, ask the most important question.
Absolutely. And you do that all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. It's very nerve-wracking in the sense of that was one of my interviews that I was more anxious about. I wouldn't say nervous, but I knew that because S.S. Rajamouli was doing his Oscar run, and this was about the summer of last year, and I knew that we were the only Indian media channel there, let alone being able to interview him and getting a solo spot. We weren't on the red carpet. It was a solo interview that I had to God knows how many emails I sent.
Thank you.
I
know how that is.
Oh gosh, how many emails? I go to a point of nagging them until I get what I want. And if that is a problem for somebody, then I don't need to work with them anyway. So if that's a key point, be respectful,
there's a reason
but be persistent. But be persistent, because they don't have any incentive. When you're asking somebody for something, granted, you're not asking with a hand, you're giving a handshake, you're partnering with them, because you're also providing a platform in whatever minuscule way that they may deem it. It is still something. And I knew I had a responsibility not just towards Ruckus Avenue Radio and our 9 million listeners who would want to hear how we're being represented in the Oscars, but I wanted to ask him questions that he wasn't being generically asked by other people. How does it feel today? It's more of how does it feel to have the first Telugu film get a standing ovation in TLC theaters?
God, generic questions.
I know, but it had to be very specific. So it's how does it feel to have the first Telugu film at the TLC theaters get a standing ovation?
Yeah.
Then his face lit up.
He gets all of a sudden he's glowing.
Exactly.
He's me about that.
So the fact that I knew that he got a standing ovation, that I had to be there to see that, right? It's not something, okay, you can look at it on Twitter or something.
Right.
But the fact that you ask a very specific question, you ask about his storytelling experience, even forget that, even there were people, I've interviewed Padmini Kolhapuri Ji, the Indian Consulate General, the Pakistani Consulate General. I've even interviewed like singers like Akhil and King. King just had his song with Nick Jonas.
Yes,
of Man Made Thank you. Those were all done during Zoom. And, I always thank, Achal Chand, the president of Ruckus Avenue Music Group, and she's always been a mentor of mine, always trusted me with these interviews. But specifically, I'm in a good position to conduct those interviews because of my language skills. Mm-hmm. So because I'm fluent in Hindi, because I'm fluent in Bengali, I can speak it, I can understand it, that I'm able to conduct these interviews where there's a comfort level.
It goes back to the part where people look at us and they think these are faults, and yet you're using them as part of your ammo bag for when you're trying to get the job done.
Absolutely. And if there's always someone to negate what you have tried to achieve, or someone to always say, like, well, this is your defect and this is why you're not going to make it. Don't ever listen to them. A funny story was people would be like, oh, why would you want to do pageants? When I was 18 and I did my first pageant, and it was for a big jewelry company in India called BC Chandra Jewelers, and their pageant was called Miss Sampurna. Sampurna means complete woman. Mm-hmm. And I was 18 years old, and that was my first pageantry. And I applied because it was at a convention. My parents were like, yeah, sure, you should do it. And they were very supportive. And then I had little aunties that I knew, that I grew up with, like, oh, how are you, Sampurna? How are you a complete woman? You're only 18. They laughed. I ended up winning. Congrats. Thank you. So it's not the fact of like the win, but it's the fact of don't listen to these naysayers at all, because anybody that can't provide you an opportunity will always try to deject you based on the limited preconceived notions that they have, or feel like, well, I couldn't do it. How can you?
People will call you crazy every which way, every day of the week.
Yeah.
Until they see you doing it, and then all of a sudden, hey, bestie.
Oh gosh, no, I don't entertain those anymore. I don't have the energy for it.
I'm happy to hear it, because it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. I'm getting my PhD. I graduate in a few months. I am working. I am continuously looking to improve myself, whether that is in the media field and moving on up with media outlets, continuing my show with Ruckus Avenue Radio, hosting for other networks, but also like working in India, like you mentioned. I want to make sure that whatever I give my attention to is with all of my heart and all of my soul. It's not going to be half-assed. It's not going to be something that I don't believe in. So I literally don't have time to listen to the crowd. And I'm humble enough to listen if it's constructive criticism. Like, hey, my supervisor said, hey, I think you could do this to make your film better. In my film, the modern colonization was the concluding aspect. My advisor was like, shout out to Professor Sarah. She was like, put that in the front. And I listened, and it's constructive. But when
look at where it led you.
Thank you. So, it's stuff like that where you have to pick and choose and understand the people that are well-wishers, and obviously take constructive criticism, understand what you can learn from. Always listen to it. Doesn't mean you have to absorb it. So if someone says like, okay, you can't be in a pageant because you're too short. Well, guess what? It's because I was short that I was able to dodge Amitabh Bachchan's security team and able to meet him. So it's
short people for the win.
It's always something that they're like, oh, well, you're this and you're that, and security guards like this, and you can't go over. So guess what I did? I went under.
The amount of times I have gone under with a camera, I kid you not. What I've done, I will take. So this was before I was injured.
Yeah.
Back when my body was like 99%. So I would take a tripod, I would put the camera, and then I would turn my light on really bright, and I would duck under, and they would see the light, so they would move because of the light, thinking I was security, when in reality I'm not. I'm just
another thing I think about when we talk about survival of the fittest, right, in entertainment. Because I'm a singer, and I grew up doing a lot of reality shows, American Idol, X Factor, Saregama, North American Edition, and when you're on stage, that's the real testament of what you do in the nick of time, when the lights are on you, you're just by yourself, and everyone's eyes are on you. So there's been times where I'm singing the national anthems at this convention, all of a sudden the sound system fails, and my karaoke stop playing in the middle of the track, while I am on stage with my crown and sash and wearing a sari, and all of the political dignitaries and guests of like 3,000 to 10,000 are sitting there listening to me. And the show must go on, so I keep singing. It doesn't matter that the music stops. I can let it affect me.
I love that about you so much.
So it's those moments that were hard, that were cringe, that were difficult, that led this whole trajectory of me being able to be like, oh, it's not a big deal. We'll just do something else. Oh, we go to the studio, or the mic doesn't work, or there's some technical difficulty, or the camera keeps messing up. Doesn't matter, we have a phone. Doesn't matter, we have this. We are gonna get there somewhere, somehow.
It's gonna work one way, shape, or form.
Whether that's in hosting, whether that's in dance, whether that's in music, education, everything. Like, literally, I can't believe that this film has gotten the acclaim that it's gotten. I know it hasn't been updated, but I actually won in 4 categories for the Reels International Film Festival.
Congratulations.
Thank you for Best Documentary, Best Story, Best Student Short, and Best COVID Film. And then I also won for the ISFA, the Indian International Short Film Festival Awards, for Best Story and Best Documentary. And officially selected for 2 more film festivals, because literally when I went back to my master's program, January of 2020 when the pandemic hit, March is when the pandemic hit, January is when I went back to school. In February, I get a call from my program advisor at the time saying they were gonna shut down the program.
No.
I went back to school after my bachelor's after 7 years, and I found out after a month the program is gonna end. And I'm just like, it's devastating.
It is.
And I was like, look, what's the worst thing that they can do at this point? I'm gonna petition. And I'm gonna get all of my class cohorts to sign it. And then we're gonna send it to the dean. We're already out. What's the worst that they can do? Right?
Yeah, there's not much.
We got the program back reinstated.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
And that's,
you are just a fighter in every way, shape, and form of the word.
It goes to, thanks to my parents, to God, to my brother, to my family. Like, we've been through some hard situations where that fighter spirit kept in me, and my dad is always saying, keep fighting. My mom's like, keep fighting. That comes from that immigrant mentality that failure is never an option.
So I guess what we would call it in, with my culture, tú eres una chingona.
Okay.
Okay, which is another word for you are just a badass. Basically.
I was gonna say, ¿cómo se dice en inglés?
So, if you ever hear somebody call you a chingona, a cabrona, things like that, some people sometimes they take offense to it, but these days, girls love to hear it because it's, you know what? Yeah, I am. Because that means I am amazing. I am a hard worker. I know I'm going to get far whether you like it or not.
I appreciate your support so much, and it comes from a very authentic and genuine place, because you know what it feels like to be a woman of color trying to make it against all odds from all different types of cultural backgrounds,
from
right?
So many angles.
And so many different angles, whether that's family, whether that's society, whether that's religion, culture, anything and everything. I've often seen a lot of women not support me, other than my mother and maybe a few, shout out to the moms. But other than, let's say, Professor Sarah, who was a key advisor for this project, or my academic advisor when I was doing my MFA, there were key females or individuals that kind of were the catalyst for me to go into action, because it's not a one-man show. It never has, and it never will be. And you need to be humble enough to realize that you can have so much fire, but there is no fire without a fuel. You need that fuel and someone else's support to be able to propel yourself. But a lot of women have kind of warned me, and they'd be like, oh, be careful, you're getting your PhD in media, you don't want to ruffle people's feathers, you're not going to get a job because then they're going to have to call you doctor, and all these naysaying things.
I would love to call you doctor. What do you mean? Are you kidding me?
But not even just that, the fact of women having to use terms like badass, and although it's a compliment, we can't be boss because we're termed as bossy. Mm-hmm. We can't be, advocating for our rights when it comes to equal pay, or when it comes to getting our equal screen time, or whatever, equality or equity. If you're asking for
equal screen time, you're being a diva.
You're being a diva. You are asking for too much. You are doing too much. You are so loud and grandiose. Whereas a man doing the exact same things
will be praised.
Yes. Will be promoted, will be glorified. Mm-hmm. So the fact that women have to kind of settle for like being this quiet, gentle little mouse.
Not quiet.
No. I am a tiger, and a tiger always roars, and the tigress is the one that hunts for the pack. So I will never dim my light to make someone else feel comfortable. That doesn't mean there's not enough light to surround everybody who is able to do so. It's the light within yourself that matters. It's not just about the spotlight. It's about sharing that, giving back, because I'm not immortal. You're not immortal. But I can guarantee you that the art that you make will be, if you persist. And so that's the legacy that I want to leave behind. It's like, I know I have certain privileges, and I can sit here and list privileges, or I can sit here and list, oh, these are the reasons why I can't get ahead. But what if I use those privileges and use my platform to give back, whether that is through radio, through film, through any platform that I have, to give back to those people who have even less privileges than I do, who maybe have more social handicaps than I do, or things that are holding them back. They don't have the financial stability, or they don't have supportive families, or the list can go on.
Absolutely.
You know, there's colorism, there's so many other things that have happened within our societies that have made a lot of women not be able to progress. So what am I doing to combat that and change that and give those opportunities back, instead of being like, well, I got mine, forget about yours.
I got mine, screw you, I don't want to help you.
That's how, it's not how it should be, because you know, I've always been one to advocate for stories, whether that's male, female, coming from different aspects. So I love sharing those stories as long as it's impactful and authentic. I love having them on my show or just speaking to them in person.
Well, for those of us who would love to be able to speak to you in person, besides me,
she gets special access.
I get access all the time.
She has my number and everything.
I do, which is great. But let's say somebody did want to tell you this story. How would they be able to get a hold of you?
Find me online, Priyadarshini G Roy, on all of the social medias. If you want to email me, the contact information is on my website, or visit PriyadarshiniFilmsEntertainment.com. Check out all of my interviews, coverages, and of course, upcoming films and projects.
Yes, and whenever those are coming out, you're going to invite me back, right?
Absolutely. You'll be here at the screening.
Okay.
Everything else
I will call you like crazy until you call me back.
Oh, of course. It's never been, we're always in constant communication, and that's how networking happens, when you meet like-minded people in the entertainment industry, and you find that group of people that think like you, and that means thinking out of the box. Then you just kind of continue to collaborate and continue to grow that circle.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, if it wasn't for you, I would have never been able to experience Holy for the first time.
Oh, I'm glad you had a good time.
And it was amazing. But you know what, Priya, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I really do appreciate this talk, learning about you, your background, and even just your political mindset has been very entertaining.
I'm glad it's been entertaining and not enraging.
And very, very educational. I love that I get to learn so much from you.
Oh, thank you.
And I feel like I'm always learning from you every time I talk to you.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see what's going to happen next. And whenever you get all these awards mailed to you, you're going to have to call me because I want to see them.
I will. I'll take a picture with all of them. They're coming from India and a couple around the globe, so it's going to take about like 18 to 22 days for them to be mailed out. But you can look at the pictures on social media in the meantime.
Yes, we will. Absolutely. Well, we're going to continue with more here on RYM News.